What is going on, guys? Welcome back to part 4 of the Build an Instagram App series. In the last part, we put together this login screen, and in this part, we're going to continue along that path and put together registration as well as hook up some more Firebase things. So that said, let's jump right in. So here we are in our login view controller, and in div tap login button, now that we have validated that we have text for the username, email field, and the password field, we're going to now set up the function to actually log in. So in the very first video, or it might have been the second, we put together this Auth Manager class. So in here, we have this function login user, username optional, email, and password. And what we're going to go ahead and here is extend this. And we're also going to add a completion parameter, which is going to return a result. Actually, what it'll return is just a bool, and that bool will represent if the user successfully signed in or not. So here we have already imported Firebase Auth. So what we can do in here now is we're going to first figure out if the user is logging in with their username or email. So we're going to say if let's email equals email. We're going to do this. Else if let username is username. This is going to be username login, and this one will be email login. So we're going to first focus on email login and registration. We'll come back to username login later, as this is more involved. So talking about email, we can now leverage auth.auth. And I think there's one more auth. Just kidding. It's auth.auth. And now we can say, I think they call it sign in with an email. So sign in with email and password. We're going to pass in the email, which is a string. And this is not the one we want, actually. We want the one with the password. So this is the one we want. So let's see if we can get that autocomplete working again. So sign in with email and password. And pass in the password. And the completion here, if you just hit enter, it'll stub it out for you. You get a optional auth result back. And you also get an error, which is optional. And in our actual closure, what we're going to do is we're going to say guard auth results doesn't equal nil, and error equals nil. And in that case, we know the user has been signed in successfully. And what we can do is we can say completion true. And if either of these two fail, aka auth result is nil or error isn't nil, we're going to say completion false. And that basically does it for this function here. And we can go ahead and use this now. Now we have a warning here because we're not using this username constant. So let's just go ahead and print it out so that warning goes away. And now what we could do is let's go back to that login view controller. And let's make sure we didn't import Firebase Auth here. I don't think we did. Nope, we didn't. So now here what we can say is simply Auth Manager dot shared, and we want to say login with username, email, and password, and a completion. So the password simple, it's password. Now we want to figure out if we should pass in the email or the username. And the way we're going to do that is pretty simple. We're going to basically say if username email contains an @ in addition to a period for the host name, we're going to assume it's an email. Otherwise, we're going to assume it's a username. So this isn't the greatest email validation, but we're going to use this for now. And we'll come back and make this a little more resilient. So I'm going to come up here and say var username is string optional, var email is string optional. And in this case, we're going to say username is that because we're in username. Otherwise, the email property equals that. and then we'll respectively pass that in as a parameter, and one of them will be nil since it's being assigned in a if else. And then finally, we have completion, which just returns a bool. Now, because this is the last parameter, we can use a trailing closure, and we're going to say success in. And let me actually put these back on one line so it doesn't give us weird indentations. And basically now in here, we can say if success, basically user logged in. Otherwise, error occurred. So if the user signs in, we want to dismiss the current view controller. So we're going to say dismiss true, and completion, dismiss true, completion is nil. And if an error occurs on login, we're going to show an alert view. So we're going to say let alert is a UI alert controller with a title. We're going to say log in error. We were unable to log you in. And the preferred style will be an alerts. We're going to add a dismiss button to this. So add action, UI alert action with a title. And this is going to be, let's get rid of my antivirus pop-up that likes to make an appearance in all my videos. This is going to be dismiss, cancel, and the handler can actually just be nil since we're not going to actually do anything other than dismissing the alert. And finally, we want to present the alert animated true. And something super important that you need to do is this closure is called on a background thread. And we want to do all this UI stuff. So we need to do that on the main thread. So go ahead and add dispatch queue main async and move this if else block inside of this block right here. And that should be a basic setup of the sign-in logic. So if you go ahead, let's see. So we're in a closure now. So we need to say self. And we also need self here. Hit Command R. And let's make sure we have the right simulator. Let's see, single argument function types. Let's see what it's complaining about here. Username, completion. This should be wrapped in parentheses, and we can drop these parentheses. And this also needs to be escaping, and that should go after the colon. And let's see, that looks like it's good to go. Hit Command B. Should be building now, perfect. So you might be asking why this needs to be escaping. The reason is we use the completion inside of another closure. And as a result, the scope needs to escape. So go ahead and hit Command R. And we should now, if we type in, let's say, joe@gmail.com and password, we see here, login error, we were unable to log you in, obviously, because we haven't created an account. So let's create this registration form real quick. So we're going to jump back to the login view controller. And I'm going to be lazy, and we're going to copy some of the code we added in here. Namely, we're going to copy the login button and these two fields. So go ahead and copy those, and go ahead and jump to your registration view controller. You can paste them right up here. So we're going to add, this is going to be a username field. We're going to copy this one more time. So we're going to want 3 fields on here, the username, the email, and the password. So this is going to be email address. This is going to be username. We have a password already, and then this should be a register button. And I'm going to actually call this sign up, since I believe that's what Instagram calls it. And we don't really need anything else here. Something I think that I'll also do is if we go back, let's see why we have some errors here. So we've got some constants that we're using here. So let's also grab that from login and paste it on up here. And if we hit Command B, everything should be compiling now. But what I was going to say is what I'm going to do here is in the did tap, let's see, did tap, in the did tap create account function, we present this register controller, and I'm going to go ahead and create a navigation controller. So we can actually leave that there, and we can say vc.title is create account, and we're gonna present a UI navigation controller where the root controller is the VC. So if you run it now, you'll actually see a title bar with the words create account. So it looks a lot nicer. We don't see our views yet because we need to assign frames. So let's jump to our registration controller, and we're going to add all those subviews here. So we're going to say view, add subview, username, email, and password. And we also want that register button. We should include privacy and terms here, but let's be lazy and skip it for now. So those are the 4 views that we've got. And we want to set their frames and viewed layout subviews. We're going to first call super. And the first one is going to be the username field. Frame is going to be a cgrect 20. This will be view.safeAreaInsets.top plus 10, view.width minus 40 and 52. And let me just copy and paste this 4 times. The width won't change. The only thing changing is going to be the actual thing we're assigning a frame to. So email, password, and register. And in addition to that, what's going to change is the Y position. So this is going to be the username field dot top, or sorry, dot bottom. This one's going to be the email field that decides to autocomplete. Let's just copy it from there. Let's see. So this is going to be this dot bottom. And then this last one is going to be this password field. So go ahead and copy that. Dot bottom. And I'm quickly going to also change the background color of this button. Instead of it being system blue, it's going to be system green. Hit Command R to build and run. And I apologize, I'm trying to go through this UI work a little faster than usual. And the reasoning is I want to keep these videos short and focus on some of the cooler things. So we have this cool looking form now. I think we can add some space at the top here between the title, the navigation bar, and the first text field. So for the first Y, let's add 100. And what else do we want? We also want a function that gets called when the button is tapped. So func did tap register, and we want to add that as a target to our button. So register button, add target, self, selector, did tap register, and this is going to be for a touch up inside. We're also going to set the delegate for our fields, similar to the login screen. So username, email, whoops, spell self correctly, and password. And we're going to want to add an extension down here so those errors go away. We're going to extend this controller with a UI text field delegate. And we're going to implement should return. And basically in here, what we're going to do is we're going to say if text field is the username field, we're going to say focus onto the email field. Else, if text field is the email field, we're going to say focus onto the password field. Else, we're going to say did tap register, and we're going to say return true. So that'll take care of that. Now in here, we want to first dismiss the keyboard for all the fields. So we're going to say resign first responder for all the fields. Then we want to get the contents of all the fields and make sure that they are correct. So we're going to say guard let email equals email field dot text. Let password equals password field dot text. Let username equals username field dot text. Else return. Now we know that they're not nil now. We also want to validate that they're not empty strings. So we're going to say email is empty. And sometimes the autocomplete really doesn't like to be helpful. So feel free to copy and paste as I'm doing here. Like that. Make sure you add that comma, which I always forget to add. And this one's going to be password, and this one's going to be username. And let's see, if we hit Command B, it looks like we have an error. Why do we have an error? Let's see, because we have an extra comma here. But actually, another thing we need to add is we want to make sure the password's length is greater than or equal to 8, since that's what we're going to be requiring the users to follow when signing up. So once the user has provided all of this, we should be able to use our Auth Manager to create an account. So let's go to Auth Manager, and let's implement this function. So register new user with a username, email, and password. So a few things we want to do in here. The workflow is going to be as follows. So we're going to first check if username is available. We also want to check if email is available. We want to then we want to create account and then insert account to database. So there's quite a bit of logic going on here, 4 things precisely. So the first thing we want to do is validate that the username that the person is trying to sign up with is available. We don't want duplicate usernames for users. We then want to make sure the email that they're signing up with is available. So we only have 1 email associated per account. Then we want to actually create the account. And finally, we want to insert that account into the database. So that all said, that leads me to Firebase. So head on over to Firebase, and we're going to set up our database. So click on database, you'll come to the landing page here. And once it decides to load, go ahead and hit this button and you'll get this pop-up. And we're going to start off in test mode, where things are much easier to configure to begin with. Go ahead and continue. And here it's going to ask which region you want to put your database in. US Central works for me. So go ahead and create that. And bear with it a few seconds. Takes maybe 10 seconds. Usually it's pretty fast. But what we want to do now is go to our database manager object here. And here we're going to start creating functions that that login or auth manager is going to use. So actually coming back to the auth manager, it looks like we want a function to check if username is available and email. So what I'm going to do is here in database manager, a clean public function would look something like this. Can create new user with email, username, and then completion returns a Boolean. And this function was basically going to do all the underlying database checks for us. There's no reason the auth manager object needs to be aware of how that works. It'll simply ask the database manager, hey, can I create this account? And a cool thing that we'll do later on, but I'll call out here, is you can add these docs string comments and they'll pop up in the autocomplete. So let's add one so I can show you guys. Check if username and email is available. And you can even include parameters in here. So you can do something like this. And you'll see this professionally being done all over the place. So email string representing email. And doing it like this is really good practice. It makes it look cleaner, and also it's helpful when you work on a team of engineers for people to understand what your code actually does. So now if we go back to our auth manager, to satisfy these first 2 steps, we can say database manager, shared, and can create account with email, username is username, and we're going to stick with that trailing closure syntax. So let's delete that, and we can do this. And we can say success in, let's call this can create. So we're going to say in here, if can create, now we want to actually create the account and insert into the database. So we're going to actually move that comment in here. And I don't know if you guys caught it actually, but if we go back and type it in again, when we start typing can create, you can see the doc string comment that we added above the function pops up in the autocomplete right here. So it's pretty useful when you have a large scale application. So how do we actually create an account? We're going to say auth.auth, and we're going to say create user. Email is email, password is password. And once again, we can just hit enter on this and it will get a auth result and an error. Just call it results and error. And in here, we're going to basically say if error equals nil and results does not equal nil, we went ahead and succeeded. And now we want to insert into database. So that's kind of the flow here. You can see how we're using various objects to hide away functionality. So if the user cannot create the account, we want to call the completion. Do we have a completion? Let's say we don't even have a completion here. So we want to add a completion to this function. It'll be escaping, bool returning void, and that bool basically represents if the account was created. And let's see, this should be a guard rather than an if. And here we're going to say completion is false. So basically, either username or email does not exist. And let's see, in this case, if we were unable to create an account, completion will also be false. Firebase Auth could not create an account. And then here we want to do a database insertion. So let's hit Command B, make sure we're still compiling. We wrote a decent amount of code. Looks like we're still good to go. And let's take a look over here. So it looks like this configured everything and it's working. For our video series, we're going to not use Firestore. We're going to use the real-time database. Slightly easier to work with, in my opinion. Go ahead and select it, and you want to go to rules. And we want to change read and write to be true. This will allow public read and write. And while we are developing, it comes in handy. So once you go ahead and change it, you want to make sure you hit publish. And let's see, it's going to warn you here, error saving rules, line 7. Let's see, line 7. What did we mess up on line 7? Whoops, looks like I pasted true in the wrong spot. So throw true there and there. Go ahead and hit publish. And it might give you a warning that this opens up your database to public read and write. That's okay for now. We're going to talk about security with this later. Looks like it saved it. Go ahead and hit Command R to refresh just to make sure it looks good still. If you leave it false, you won't be able to read and write to your database. So now that's good to go. We're going to come back to our database manager. And the other function that we wanted was insert new user with email, username, and we don't really need the password. We can keep the password a part of the Firebase authentication stuff. No reason to save the user's password. It's also extremely bad practice and very insecure. Let's add a doc string to this. Inserts new user data to database, like so. And let's see, parameters, email and username, that still works, perfect. And here we can actually use the database. So how do we use the database? So first we want a reference to the database. And we get that by saying database.database. And on this database, we can basically insert nodes. So we want to call the child function on here is what I believe it's called. Let's see, let's take a look at our fancy documentation over here, which is what I said a few parts ago. We'll be referencing this as we build. So here we've got authentication. That's not what we want. We want the real-time database, iOS, and we're going to look at read and write data. So basically, we create a database reference here. It's .reference. That's one thing I forgot. And off of that, you should be able to reference a child. So let's come here and add a reference. That'll give us a reference to the database. And now here we can say we want to create a new child where the key is going to be an email. And we want to set a value for it. And the value for now is simply going to be a dictionary where the key is a username and the value is the username itself. And we also want a completion handler on here with completion block. Let's see what the parameter type is. With completion block, it looks like, and I think this returns a snapshot. So go ahead and do a command B. Looks like that syntax is wrong, so let's find out what it is. So let's see, contextual closure, error. So there's supposed to be two parameters, it looks like, an error and a database reference. So we're gonna say error, and we don't really care about the reference, so we're just gonna say underscore, and looks like that's correct. Hit command B. Looks like we can make this a trailing closure syntax also, since it's the last parameter. So you can drop that parameter and just put the curlies like that. And we're gonna validate if error is nil, then we know it's exceeded, and we're gonna say completion true, otherwise failed. And we should add a completion parameter to this. Again, it needs to be escaping, so the scope can escape. And we are going to say completion is true. Completion is false. And we also want to put a return here so it doesn't ever fall through, even though it's an if-else. That's just good practice. So we should also add another string parameter here. And I won't be adding these for every single function as we build this. It's going to kind of waste time, but I just want to show you guys it's available and it's good practice. So async callback for result if database entry succeeded. So let's go back to that Auth Manager. And this video is getting a little lengthier, so I'm going to probably cut it in like a minute or two, but insert into database, we can say database manager shared. And we can call insert new user, and this is going to be the email, username, and we're gonna again use trailing closure syntax, success in, and here we can say if success, or let's call this inserted, just because success is a little vague. So if it's inserted, we're gonna say completion true, return, else completion false, again return, failed to insert to database. And a lot of this logic, the reason we have these objects is we hide away all of this logic from the user. And now what we can do is in the registration controller, our controller doesn't need to know about any of this business, right? So we can say Auth Manager shared. And as far as the controller knows, we just want to register a user with a username, email, and a password. And the completion is simply going to return to us true or false based on all of that underlying logic that we just wrote. So if registered, good to go. Else something failed, and we're going to show an alert. And we're also going to take care of some UI updates depending on what the result is. So go ahead and wrap that in a main queue call. And let's go ahead and hit Command R. And let's see, make sure everything's building. One thing I know we didn't implement in the database manager is in this function, let's simply do a completion true for now. And we're going to implement this in the next video since it's getting long, but we should be able to create an account now. Now we're not going to see any UI feedback or updates, but let's create an account by opening that. The username we'll say is Joe at@gmail.com. I'll say password is password. Go ahead and hit this button. And let's see what's going on here. It looks like we've got a crash. Is that what it looks like? So it looks like some issues occurred down here. We did in fact crash. So we're saying child must be a non-empty string that does not contain a dot. Okay. So basically that error is occurring because in our database manager, we are trying to insert the email as the key. And in Firebase's database, you cannot have a period within any of the keys. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, we're going to create a function to create a safe email. So let's make this private. So we're going to make a new section and we're going to call it private. And we are simply going to say private func safe. Let's call it safe key. And this basically, so actually instead of even doing it this way, I have a better idea. So instead of making it database specific, let's open up our resources and jump to our extensions. And let's create an extension of string. And we're going to create a function in here. And we're going to actually make it a mutating func. And it's going to be safe database key. And we're simply going to say self replacing occurrences of dot with a dash. And what this will basically do is, let's see, what is this? Complaining about results of call not used. So let's say return, and this will be a string, and let's not even make it mutating, let's just make it a normal function. What this will basically do is for any string in our application, we can now call this on it. So it's not just tied to our database. And let's also replace the @ symbol with a dash. So now if we go back to the database manager, we can say email and go ahead and call that function. Let's try this one more time. Hopefully we won't crash. Let's clear this out. And it looks like we're already signed into the app here. We have our icons and whatnot. Did we create a user here? What probably happened was a user probably got created, but the database insertion failed. So if we go to authentication, we actually see joe@gmail.com. So let me get rid of Joe's account and let's try that one more time. So we're going to say delete account and we're going to confirm it. We're going to reset the simulator by selecting it and doing a erase all contents. And this crashes because we just rebooted the simulator, obviously, so bear with it a little bit. And once again, I apologize, this video has gotten longer, so almost there. What ends up happening is I plan out these videos and then I end up talking way more than I plan out, and these videos end up getting longer. So you guys can definitely forward a second or two, but we're gonna hit Command R. So as soon as the simulator is back on the Springboard home screen, it'll boot up the app right away. So there it goes. So what happened that first time was the account got created, but the database insertion failed. So it kind of got through halfway. So here we are. We're gonna create an account and we're gonna say the username is Joe. It's going to be joe@gmail.com, and password is going to be password. We're going to hit this register button, and darn it, we're still crashing. So let's see what the heck the problem is now. Child must be a non-empty string and not contain any of those keys. Invalid, let's see, invalid path validation. So looks like we hit the same issue. That can't be right. So database manager, we're saying email safe database key. So let's go ahead and print something. So something weird is going on. So we're setting a value which looks correct, and let's see what this key is. So you guys are gonna get a live debug session as well. I'm gonna put a breakpoint there, and I'm also gonna print it out. And we're gonna try this one more time. We should put key in here. And even though watching these debugs is probably slightly annoying for you guys, I think it's a decent amount of help because you guys learn to debug, which is really important both professionally and your own projects. So we're just gonna delete the app there, and it's not gonna actually, so let's do one other thing. Let's, on the home view controller, let's add a force sign out every single time. So when view.load gets called, we're going to say, we already have Firebase Auth here. We're going to say Firebase Auth dot, there should be auth, there should be sign out off of here, sign out, and it throws. So we're going to say try to do that. Otherwise catch. This should be a do. This should be a try. We're going to say fail to sign out. That way, every time we open up the app, it'll just sign the user out and we don't need to reboot the simulator every time. And now we're back on this screen. So let's try that one more time. So we're going to register a new user. And we're going to say Dan this time, dan@gmail.com. And this password, you can see actually, it tried to create a password for us, which is not what we want right now. So let's see if we can get rid of that. So this is Apple's password keychain stuff popping up because it has recognized it's a password field and it autofills it. So we're just going to use the password. All right, let's hit this button and it crashes, which is expected. We want to be connected to the debugger to see what the heck is happening. One more time. All right, create account. Soon I'm going to run out of ideas for people's usernames. All right, let me clear the console. And if we hit this, we should see we have sam-gmail and we still have a .com in there. Interesting. Are we not replacing the dot? I thought we were. So in here we are, we're replacing a dot with a dash. Huh. Oh, we're returning for both. I see. So what we want to actually do is we're going to return this and we can just chain this onto it. And that way it'll be correct. Okay, perfect. My mistake. I'm sure some of you guys probably saw that and were ripping your hair out as I was typing. So let's get rid of that breakpoint in the print. And we are also going to go back to Firebase and go to authentication. And clearly the users are being created, but we're going to delete. We're going to delete that. And let's delete these other users as well. We're going to delete this guy. And let's delete this guy as well. And 25th time's the charm. So let's get running again. See what happens. One more time. I should assign the user out. So I'm going to go back to home view controller and get rid of this sign out call. We should probably set up sign out in the next video. Otherwise, this debugging is going to get super annoying. So let's clear this stuff out. Create account. We're back with Joe. joe@gmail.com and password. Hit this and okay, awesome. We're not crashing now. So obviously we don't actually sign the user in, but if we come over here, if we refresh, we have Joe's account under authentication. And if we jump to the database, and from here, if we jump to the real-time database, we should see some content in here. Awesome. So we've got Joe's email. Looks like I spelled com incorrectly. And that points to a dictionary with the username key, and the username is Joe. So we're going to be updating the schema in the database as the application evolves, but this is good enough for now. That said, I totally broke my promise and this video is way too long, so we're going to wrap it up here. If you haven't destroyed the like button, make sure to do so as always. Hit subscribe, leave any comments you guys have. I will catch you in the next part.